I'm incredibly excited to introduce Steve Olson, who is an economist. He spent time with Wells Fargo, and I'm going to read his bio now. Steve is a portfolio manager and senior investment strategist located in the Utah Wells Fargo private banking office. Stephen's specific role is threefold. First, Stephen is a thought leader on the economy and the global markets. Second, he provides timely market and economic intellectual capital to Wells Fargo associates and Wells Fargo corporate clients. And I'll say Steve was working on this slide presentation up until this morning because there's so many things changing in the environment, and he wanted to have real-time data to talk about today, which I'm excited about. Third, he works with a small number of high-net-worth families, foundation endowments in managing customized portfolio. He's been in financial service industries for more than 30 years. Prior to joining Wells Fargo, Stephen worked out of New York office at JP Morgan for over 20 years, where he was a managing director. He worked with investment managers across the country. In this role, he formulated and disseminated implementing portfolio strategies. Throughout his career, Stephen has handled valuable insights and perspective on the economy and markets to institutional and private clients. He's developed a unique ability to explain complex economic and market issues in a language that's understandable. Mr. Olson earned degrees at finance and economics from Utah State University, and Stephen and his wife reside in bountiful Utah. They are parents of 5 children and have 12 grandchildren. They enjoy spending time with their family and serving in their community and traveling. I've had the fortune to hear Steve speak on a number of occasions to clients that I've worked with and companies I've worked with, and I always walk away just feeling a lot smarter from the stuff he has to share. So I'm excited to get him introduced this morning, and we'll just give him a round of applause.
It's good to be with you this morning. I've been told that during presentations, you're supposed to start with a joke. And I only knew one joke and probably wasn't appropriate for this audience. So I called our other keynote speaker, another Steve Young, and asked him, if he had a joke. He told me he did, but he wouldn't give it to me, the one that he was going to use. But he told me another one, and now I have 2 jokes I can't tell. So, but it's good to be with you to talk about a variety of different things. And the focus here is to really give you a broad-based economic update of where things are going, what's happening, and the real challenge that I was given was, let's provide good, up-to-date information so as you go into your breakout sessions, you can apply some of this information to the discussions you're going to have. And so I hope that today that not only can we have good information, but it'll also be an interactive situation where we're all kind of talking and learning and having a good discussion together. So please, we've got time, quote unquote, at the end for a discussion, but I would prefer to just really make it a situation where we're interactive the whole time through, if that's possible. So anyway, let's start out with the economy. I mean, we're definitely, as a GDP standpoint, obviously losing momentum. But the reality is that on the positive side, we continue to see positive things occur. But there's some fiscal constraints. We've had some challenges with a reduction in influx from government spending, whether it be from the unemployment surpluses they were throwing in, the stimulus checks, the child tax credits, and everything else. And so there's been adjustments. But we still seem to be plodding along despite the fact that we're seeing challenges there, and we've even seen, as consumer confidence came out a couple days ago, positive results. People are feeling better about things, and we're seeing that. Most of the data that you see here, by the way, and all this data is as of close of business Monday, and so the vast majority is there. Just so you know, we tried to get this as up to date as possible. So as we look forward with everything else and what's going on, the big question on most people's mind is recession. And are we in a recession? Are we there? So survey says, how many of you think we're either in recession or it's going to happen this year. Okay? Next year, a few less hands. How about not at all? Blow the thing off. There's a couple that are there. Well, let's talk about this and where we're at. So commonly, the definition of a recession for the layman is what? 2 negative quarters of GDP, right? We've had that. We've had that. And that is the lay definition historically of how people think about things, and it's definitely something that the financial people, as they publish their information on the news, that's what they focus on and talk about. The reality is that there's a group put together, a group of economists that are called the Business Cycle Dating Committee. Now, you heard dating, so I'm sure you thought Tinder, right? It's not that, okay? But the Business Cycle Dating Committee, and they're actually a subset of the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is a private nonprofit organization. These are the folks that determine if there's a recession or not. They have no specific meeting dates. They meet in private. There's no publication of anything that they put out. And I can tell that each of them, I feel very comfortable because they're 60 years or older right now. All of them are from prestigious universities, so they're all academics. And when they get together, do they talk about negative GDP? Well, absolutely. But they also look at real personal income, less transfers. They look at non-farm payroll. They look at personal consumption. They look at wholesale retail sales. They look at a variety of different things, but there's no set agenda. There's no formula for them. They just get to decide. And then they announce, we're in a recession. Sometimes that announcement comes after the recession is actually over. That's why they call it a dating committee, because they date it. So are we in a recession? I don't know. They haven't told us yet. I'm going to tell you, though, that if we are in a recession or if we are going to have a recession, it's going to be extremely mild. It'll be very, very short, and you won't expect a lot of challenges here. So because as we look historically at what's happened, if you look at this chart, on the left-hand side, we're looking at the expansions and the recessions we've had back to the 1920s. The recessions are the gray number, the blue number, the expansions, the gray number. And as you can see, we pretty much have very short winters and very long summers from a standpoint of the way the economy grows and what's happening. And so, in fact, as we look at it, recessions tend to last only about 14 months, where expansions have been averaging about 47 months. On the right-hand side, this bubble chart really looks at things back from the Great Recession. And on the right chart, we show the years where a recession occurred. That's on the x-axis. And then on the y-axis, we're showing the length of the recession. And then the size of the bubble is the severity. What really happened? How severe really was this? And again, so when we can look at things and where things have happened, what we've noticed is, while we've had a couple severe ones recently, the likelihood is this time we won't, and there's one primary reason or catalyst for that, and that's jobs. We have very, very low unemployment, and people continue to spend. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes as we go forward, but that's one of the main catalysts here. When we look at the cyclical sectors out there, these are 4 areas that I consider to be kind of the 4 horsemen of a recession, because they're key in our trend to look at as if we're in a recession or not. Historically, one or many of them become overextended prior to or during a recession. What you can see right now is we really haven't had that. And so the question is, are we in a recession, or are we even going to have a recession? And again, if we do so, probably mild. But we're gearing up for it because we hear so much on a consistent basis about recession, about opportunities, and about what's going on. But again, the clear picture comes from the fact that unemployment is so low. 3.7% in the US. In Utah, 2%. 2%. So, survey says, how many of you within your firms have job openings, have recs out today? About 3/4 of you. Take that further, curiosity. How many of is it 10 or more positions? A handful? Okay. 5 or more positions? Several more? Okay, so the reality is that we have lots of job openings and lots of opportunities. In fact, as we look at the JOLTS report, the most recent data we have is as of July, but we're looking at, in the US, 11.2 million job openings. 11.2 million, that's almost 1.9, and you can see it's 1.8, I can't remember the number I looked at yesterday, 1.87 jobs for every person that is on the unemployment roll. Now, we recognize that there are a lot of people that aren't on the employment roll that maybe should be. We saw several people come flying back last month onto the employment, so we saw the participation rate come up, and we saw an employment bump from 3.5 to 3.7 because of that. But the reality is that there's lots of jobs out there. The challenge we have is capabilities, location are the biggest challenges that we have out there, and just trying to get people into those jobs. Now, over the next few months, and we've heard over the last few weeks, there's corporations that have and will announce that there's going to be layoffs. It's okay. We've still got plenty of job openings for the people to leave. The quit ratio, the number of people that actually have exited their job and chose another one, skyrocketed over the last couple of years. So people leaving, people coming back, people looking at other opportunities. And so the biggest concern we've got right now really is, with the hampered labor supply, is looking at the strong wage growth, the inflationary challenge. In Utah, interesting, as we break down this number and look at the JOLTS reports, again, as of July, it showed 110,000 job openings in the Beehive State. That's a lot of jobs. Tremendous amount of jobs. And so there's definitely huge opportunity out there as we go forward. The hot topic on most everybody's mind is inflation. We know the Fed meets today, and we'll be making an announcement today. They've been meeting. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But as we look at inflation, it's been precipitously high, definitely a challenge. And the question is, where do we go from here, and what happens? The first thing I'd say is we look at these numbers with headline inflation at 8.2%. Definitely shortages across the economy. Definitely China and their zero COVID policy has been a challenge. But supply demand has been an issue. But I'm just going to suggest to you that the reality is that you're going to start to see inflation itself gradually go down over the next few months. We probably hit our peak here a couple months ago at the 9.1. And you know, I didn't ask John. John, is it okay if you use a 4-letter word in this group? Yeah. Okay. The word is math. Okay, and I know to a lot of people that is a 4-letter word. But how do we calculate inflation? Monthly basis, 12-month average, right? So if we don't stay at the same level every month, and it actually decreases every month a little bit, what's going to happen to inflation as a whole? Going to go down. The reality is that we are going to see inflation go down. The challenge is it's very unlikely we're going to see prices decrease. That's the difficulty. And the challenge we've got with prices not decreasing is most of the people that do the buying in this country are the middle class. The middle class make up the largest portion of purchasers, And they've had a massive change in what's happened to where they've had to spend money, just like we have. When we look at the components of inflation, more of their wallet share is going three places: rent or home ownership, groceries, and transportation. And so when we have a bigger share of that wallet share going there by mandate, because we all need those things, the real challenge is, how do we combat that as we're spending on discretionary items? So we have to think differently about what's happening. When we think about the components of GDP and how they're made up, it also affects them. So here we are challenged with this and what's going on, and we look at the general public and what's happened. These sticky prices have caused some changes in behavior. In the second quarter, we saw debt in the country surpass 16 trillion for the first time. We recognize that some of that is age-based, but it's also a significant amount of people. And another interesting thing is we've seen kind of an interesting tidbit here. Pawn shop activity has increased. People are going in, obtaining dollars so they can continue with their current lifestyle. As John mentioned, I live in Bountiful. A couple weeks ago, a friend of mine called me, like a Wednesday night, and said, "Hey, you want to grab some dinner?" And I said, "You bet, the marital deduction is off doing something else." He says, "Let's meet at Texas Roadhouse at 5:30. And I said, "Great." We waited 35 minutes on a Wednesday night at Texas Roadhouse in Bountiful to get a seat. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe they don't have enough staff. Nope, every table is full. So we continue to see people spend. And again, that job scenario is critically important, because as long as they have jobs, we continue to see people spend money. But we're seeing credit card debt increase. We haven't seen a situation of a defaults increase at all, or late payments. But the net is we're not going to really see these inflation components going down. We are seeing corporations change their process by trying to pass on these costs to their customers. Example, a few weeks ago, my wife brought home a box of cereal, okay? Grandkids were coming. We still had a little bit of the cereal, same cereal in the pantry. And my wife pulled it out and she said, "This is terrible." And I don't remember if it's Fruit Loops or Captain Crunch or whatever, I don't know what it was. But she said, "Look at this, this cost me dramatically more." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, but look, not only did it cost more, but the ounces on the box are less. Shrinkflation is what we're calling that. Let's charge more for less of the commodity, but the box is the same, so people kind of get faked out about it." Okay? A little devious, but I looked at her and said, "That is really cool." The spousal unit didn't think so, you know. But anyway, just interesting where things are going and what's happening. Now, as we look at inflation, though, as a whole, we've seen, as an aggregate, commodity prices come down from their high point. So from an input standpoint, we should start to see some relief from a standpoint, again, of the inflationary standpoint of going forward. Now, we had an announcement this morning from our friend Vladimir that he was going to be increasing troops in Ukraine, and he waved his little saber and threatened nuclear again, didn't he? Y'all see that? Oil prices jumped almost 2%, pretty much immediately. They've subsequently come down. We're up about a quarter before I came up here. But again, that oil price could make a big change in things as we go forward. Time will tell on what happens there. But again, in my opinion, you're going to start to see the inflation numbers go down, again, despite the fact that you're going to see prices be fairly sticky because of where we're at. This is the S&P, and it's showing earnings slowing after really soaring in 2021. And I show this slide because it pretty much mirrors what most businesses, whether they're in the S&P or public or anything else, really are facing right now. We're facing various different headwinds. We've got rising wages, higher commodity prices, input costs, high interest rates, which are going higher, nominal sales growth, and so a much higher dollar, which is eroding things. And so we're starting to see margins compress. And as we see that, again, it's just going to be more difficult as we try to produce the earnings that we really want to achieve. And again, I'd say just to understand that none of us are alone in this as we go forward. Okay, before I hit the Fed, we've hit I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. Any questions, comments, any place we want to go deeper on anything that we've covered so far? Yes, sir.
Unemployment compensation. There's a lot of labor who's not in the workforce or looking for work.
Yes.
And you hear about savings rates dropping. You just talked about credit card debt going up. But what we never hear about is where does state unemployment and federal unemployment compensation come into play? Because I get from anecdotal evidence, the sense that people are still getting big checks. I shouldn't say big checks. They're still getting checks from the state.
They're still getting checks. The thing that happened again that we saw is that the bonus benefit did go away. Okay? The challenge is that each state calculates unemployment benefits differently based upon their state. Hawaii happens to be the highest. If you want the highest unemployment check, go to Hawaii and be unemployed. The challenge, though, was during this unprecedented change, where the federal government mandated a greater extent of unemployment compensation. In the great state of Utah, your break-even point was basically just over $50,000. So you could go to work, or you could stay home and be unemployed and receive the same compensation as long as you were about $50,000 or less. Lots of incentive to go to work, yeah? Okay. That also drove a lot of the supply chain issues. Why? Everybody had lots of money. You know, we talk about supply chain and everybody says, well, why, where, what happened? Well, what happened was nobody was producing anything from the base commodities to make products all the way up. We've changed our philosophy of having giant warehouses full of goods. And so what happened? Everybody had money, so they went out and continued to spend the way they always had. And so, obviously, things changed. Inflation increased dramatically. Today, we did have a lot of smart people that said, look, hey, I'm not going to work, but I'm going to continue to receive as much money as I am, so I'm going to save. I'm also going to get my stimulus checks, so I'm going to save. And so while we've seen savings deteriorate, we've still seen a number of these people that are currently unemployed still have bankrolls that they continue to survive. But we're coming very close to the end of that for most of them. In addition to that, we look at what's happened from a standpoint of during the time that they were unemployed, an additional relief which allowed them to add. There were a lot of people that didn't pay their rent. Why? They had rent relief and didn't have to. And yet they were still making as much, net. And so the bottom line is there's still been a lot of people that still have the wherewithal to continue to spend, but that's coming to an end very quickly. And so we are seeing mass changes, but this was, this whole thing was imposed by, government that was trying to do good, but was a little misled in what they did. I was one of the group of economists that signed on to a request to Congress for the stimulus checks, for example. What was the request? Make it a debit card. They did that the second time finally, right? But it was also with an end date. Spend it or lose it. 5 children, right? You heard that. All of them were gainfully employed the entire time. All of them making 6 figures, various parts of the nation. All of them got stimulus checks. 4 of the 5 invested it. They didn't spend it. They invested it. And so you look at it, how was that stimulative to the economy? It wasn't. It was stimulative to them. They took the money. But the reality is that it didn't accomplish the goal. So they invested it. They have money to fall back on. They're all still employed making 6 figures. No big deal. So lots of moving parts that cause that challenge. But we are coming to an end of people not being able to work. We saw, I'm trying to remember, I think 781,000 people last month come back into the job market. And that's the reason we went from 3.5 to 3.7 is the participation rate increased. And so we are seeing them come back. And that's kind of testament to that. The money's gone. Okay. Other questions? This is a quiet group. The biggest area of vulnerability is, again, the discretionary area, okay, where people may or may not be able to spend, okay? We've seen massive changes with people. We've seen them increase in their restaurants, travel, et cetera, but those areas also have some challenges as we move forward and as things start to slow down. Again, the real challenge is wallet share. It's where do I have to spend money? I look at it right now, and if I've got grandkids coming and chocolate milk happens to go up to $6 a gallon, I'm still buying it. Why? Because I can. But the thing that I would recommend is go out and look and watch. Prior to being at J.P. Morgan, I spent time in Boston at a little company called Fidelity. And I was under the tutelage of a little guy about this tall with silver hair. You may have heard of him. His name's Peter Lynch. Okay, arguably the most preeminent equity manager that's ever walked the planet. Those of you who are too young to know the name, go Google it, okay? Still alive and well, lives in Arizona, okay? But his whole philosophy in looking at companies and analyzing them was, what he taught me was, don't just look at the spreadsheets. Don't just read the reports. Go out and look at people, go out to stores, walk about, and see what's going on. And I still employ that today. I go out and look. And I look at the price of chicken. And I mean, trust me, I hate to shop. I despise it. But it's part of my job. I need to know what's actually going on, not just looking at the spreadsheets. And so, for instance, just for example, I'll use the chicken example. Any of you that have seen this over the last few months have seen this chicken's varied from like $3.50 a pound. These are breasts, $3.50, $3.99, up to $5+ a pound. But what we've seen is more frozen chicken go out. Why? It's cheaper. People are substituting. And so as we look at those types of things across the board, where are people going to substitute? Where's the discretionary income going to go when so much is going to rent, groceries, and transportation? And again, if oil does go up, that'll continue to eat a lion's share and cause other problems. So it's really about the discretionary spending that your biggest challenges are going forward right now until we start to see adjustments in things. And again, who knows when that's going to occur because prices are going to remain sticky. Yes, sir.
What do you think about the current valuations of the market, U.S. versus international?
Right now, in my opinion, your best bet is more on the core side in large caps in the U.S. from a safety. I'm looking overall opportunity and safety standpoint. International is probably a little more difficult and challenged. The U.S. is a little more challenged in certain ways because of the dollar, and so we look at company by company. The strength of the dollar has caused some real challenges in selling our goods abroad. That's unlikely to change. It'll be interesting to see when the Fed puts out their notes today, what happens to the dollar, and if we see a continued increase based upon what they're doing. Because we see across the board companies doing well, but as a whole, globally, we continue to face challenges. Unlikely to have a global recession muddling through. But right now, from a pure risk-adjusted basis, U.S. large caps probably look the best, and a balance between value and growth rather than just going one way or the other. Growth's outperformed in the most recent days. Well, let's move on and talk a little bit about the Fed, because they will be making their interest rate announcement here at 12:30. Persistent inflation has caused them to make adjustments and increase rates. We have to remember that the major issue here is, though, that interest rates really don't determine inflation. Let me say that again. Interest rates don't determine inflation and the direction of it. It's the amount of money circulating in the economy that determines inflation. Again, it's supply-demand. If everybody's chasing a gallon of milk, well, the prices are going to go up. And as long as we all have lots of money to spend, we're going to continue to see inflationary pressures. So that's a real challenge, because the Fed really hasn't focused on monetary policy, which they could. And I personally believe that the move 14 years ago by the Fed to move from a scarce reserve model to an abundant reserve model really has driven a lot of this. Let me explain that. The scarce reserve model was when banks actually pretty much determined what the Fed funds rate were, because they were the ones that were bidding up what they were going to provide. The abundant model was the Fed says, nope, there's plenty out there, everybody can do everything, and by the way, we're going to set rates. And what did they do the last several years? They kept rates artificially very low. And so now we're seeing them increase to try to get them back to what parity is. Where that is, we really don't know, because the market doesn't have that much influence anymore on what rates are or where they should be. And that's a real challenge. So, the Fed's been active in saying their intention is to tighten policy enough to get inflation under control. There's been, there was discussion here during the last couple of weeks about a super increase up to 75 basis points, or 100 basis points announced today. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're probably at 75 basis points today. There's meetings in November and December. The market is forecasting another 75 basis points in November and another 50 basis points in December. And then 25 in January, February, and a January 1st, February. So again, that's the market. When's the Fed going to pivot and stop this? I don't know. They seem committed. My hope is that the November meeting were only 50 basis points, in December only 25, and then they cool their heels for a little bit and maybe readjust their sights. Because the challenge with increasing interest rates on a consistent basis is it hurts everything. It hurts housing. It hurts auto sales. Credit card debt goes up dramatically because of the cost. And so it really does hurt the consumer. And more than anything else, it causes fear and trepidation in the hearts of people. Now, mortgages just under 6% right now. I saw the billboard as I was driving in, okay? That's a good rate when I had a mortgage. Today, that sounds terrible for most people. But boy, that sounds like a really good rate. When I was, when I had a mortgage, that was a good rate. But again, things have changed over time. And so we've already seen other central banks following the lead of the Fed. The Swedish bank announced actually a 100 basis point increase a couple days ago, and we'll probably see others across Europe and other places also increase rates. Questions on the Fed? Interest rates? Okay. If not, let's move on. Let's talk about real estate just a little bit. We all know the yes, sir. Yes, sir, please. Actually, I think the things that you've mentioned are 100% spot on. Again, the last two recessions you saw in that bubble chart were pretty severe. And they came, you know, after that 14-year period here. So there have been changes that caused that. I believe, though, that, again, if we go into recession, if we are in recession this time, that the overriding reality of the number of people employed will mitigate that recession. It seems that our drug of choice here in the United States is spending money. It's what we do best, right? And so the reality is that if people have jobs, they spend money, and that will mitigate recession. Again, remember, they're going to spend it in certain places, though, where they can, where they have to, until we see some adjustments there. So definitely, the last couple have been a little more rough. But I think this one, but again, things were different. If unemployment was at 6-7%, this would be a completely different story. But because we have so many job openings, because we have capabilities to fill those jobs, even as people announce layoffs, we're going to be okay. Many people will, if this is a recession, will sail through this not really knowing it was a big deal. The big deal was the inflation, not the recession. So we've seen softening. This data is a little bit old. Yesterday, we saw some numbers come out. And again, the housing market, sensitive to interest rate changes and, is very sensitive to what the Fed's going to do. And so, we look at the housing starts, and they were actually buoyed up by multifamily projects that went in over last month. But, falling permits definitely are showing there's some weakness there, okay? Now, what about in Utah? Again, this money's from July. But again, the information in August is just starting to trickle in. Interest rates are definitely a concern. We've seen a little dip in Utah, but it still remains stubbornly high. We've got our occupancy ratio is off the charts. It's hard to find places for people to live. We've definitely seen significant building, but still, we've got a couple factors that are driving here. We've got people that grow up in the great state of Utah that actually want to stay here instead of go someplace else. And then we have in-migration, especially with the Silicon slopes, that has brought in a lot of people along with other companies, and we continue to see growth there. So as we look across the nation, the only, the state that had a greater influx of people than we do was just north of us, and that was Idaho. And so we continue to see a number of people come into this state, and they tend to drive up the prices also. When you're selling your house in California for $1.2 million, and you walk into Utah and you're saying, wow, I can get the same house here for $700,000. I think I'll still spend my $1.2 million, or maybe I won't, but definitely those cash buyers have driven up things a lot too because of the influx of people as they've come in to accept positions. And so while definitely we're seeing some softening, definitely we're seeing, I talked yesterday to a couple realtors as I prepared for this, see what's going. They're seeing less showings and everything else, but they're just not seeing, prices are still fairly stubborn, even though they're seeing some decreases. It's not as significant as we're seeing across the nation, and primarily, again, it's because of that supply-demand scenario. So it's definitely not helping the state's affordability crisis that they've got right now. We talked a little bit about global, And definitely there's some headwinds out there. This chart basically shows, activity. Green is good, red is bad. At the top, you can see that you're looking at global manufacturing and services, then specific areas developed, emerging, US, Japan, UK, and then down into the emerging markets below. But again, what we're seeing, and you're looking on the far right side at July and August's numbers, but again, things are affecting things as we slow down, not just domestically, but internationally. And so we see a slowdown across the globe, but we don't see a major drop yet. And it's unexpected to see that major drop. What we've got to do is continue to have, definitely we would love to have COVID go away. I was told by my brother that I need to go get my 4th shot now because it's, I guess, Omicron helpful. He also told me I'd get my flu shot and at the same time, he's a doc, and it won't have an ill effect. So he said, just go in and get it done. And so, we continue to see positive things there. Our negative from a supply chain standpoint is just still China trying to keep their zero policy intact. And that will continue to be, a challenge as we move forward. But it's definitely, inflation's a global concern. As we talked before, we're seeing international banks also change. And again, the hope is that we don't see major changes in commodities so that we start to see some mitigation there. Again, the wild card out there is definitely oil. We've also already seen natural gas push back up higher, and it'll probably stay there. So for the extended period of time of the winter, if nothing else, just to make sure energy companies have a better profit picture, because they can. And so, where we're at today. Questions there? If not, we got to get into politics, right? Hit the unknowns, hit the. So we're looking here in November. This is the betting chart. Basically, you can see across the board, it looks like we're going to have divided government. Statistically, it looks like today, and remember these things change, you can see how much they've changed just since the first part of the year, dramatic changes. But it looks like today that the House will be taken over by the Republicans. Looks like today that the Senate will be maintained by the Democrats, and obviously will maintain a Democratic president. Divided government, though, from an economic standpoint, from a market standpoint, is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. We tend to see more positive things economically with divided than when we have just one ruling party. And so from an economic standpoint, that's good news. As we move forward, no political affiliation there, just good news because of division. We've talked a little bit about the consumer. I just want to indicate to you that as a whole, the consumer continues to be in good shape, and we've seen changes. In the top right-hand corner, you can see the household debt service ratio. This basically looks at income and the percent of that income that goes to pay off debts. And that includes mortgages, car loans, credit cards, etc. And what you can see is, well, we've had an increase there, but we're still really at very, very low periods of time. Now, part of that has to do with the fact that many people, as they age and as they retire, don't have mortgages. And we currently have about 10,000 people a day turning 65. Many of those people don't have a mortgage anymore. And so we've seen changes. The other change we've seen is how grandma and grandpa treat their assets, which is vastly different than it was as I was growing up. When my grandparents retired, they went on a cruise. If we would have been at the launch of the boat, of the ship, we would have been standing at the dock waving goodbye, right? As good grandchildren would have been. But today, when grandma and grandpa retire and they go on the cruise, what do? What do? They take them with them. They'll take their kids. In many cases, they'll take their grandkids, and they will pay for it. And so we're seeing a vast change in how in spending patterns among seniors. Again, obviously, those that can't afford to do this won't, but we are seeing seniors change their spending pattern, assisting in GDP growth, assisting in economic activity. They're much more active than they were historically, from a standpoint of travel, participating in events, going to specialty items such as concerts, eating out more, and doing other things. And so we're seeing a vast change there, and they have the capability to spend. Here's the challenge. When my grandparents died, my parents received a nice inheritance. Guess what? Your parents are spending yours. So don't plan on it, okay? There might be something there, but the reality is because of the spend, there's a difference, so we need to plan differently amongst ourselves in what we're doing. Does that make sense? So, positive standpoint, the consumer is in pretty good shape, and we see different types of spending. And again, as long as the unemployment rate maintains low, people will spend. Again, just a reminder that where they spend is a little bit different. Okay, consumer confidence. Specifically, I talked earlier about the uptick, and this chart shows really, shows consumer confidence in the stock market specifically, because when investors are worried about the outlook, the natural tendency is to sell their risk assets. Okay, we've seen that, over the last week here, we've seen risk assets being sold. But the reality is that history tells us the timing this market way is actually a pretty big mistake. So over the last 50 years, there's been 8 distinct peaks and troughs noted here as we've seen. And I just want to make sure I get these numbers right because I wrote them down here. The S&P, we know how much the S&P gained or lost in the last 12 months following. On average, buying at a confidence peak returned 4.1%. Buying at a trough returned 24.9%. And so again, opportunities definitively as we look across the board, when we look at the markets as a whole and risk, and we talk about investing as this man asked about, definitely there's opportunities as we move forward to invest and to put money to work based upon consumer confidence and where things are going and the markets as a whole. Okay. Other questions? Okay, so kind of summarize and we'll see if we've got any broad questions to go on. Recession. Personally, I don't think the dating committee is going to call this a recession. I think that if they do, they'll do it out of political pressure. Because the reality is that we're still doing okay. The employment number is good. Again, GDP is not the only factor. There's so many other things that are there. But again, if it is a recession, extremely mild, most of us won't even notice it. We talked about employment. Unemployment nationally at 3.7%. I can't see it going over 4 anytime soon, even as we see an influx of people come back into the job market. And the primary reason is 11.2 million jobs, 120,000 here in Utah that are open. There's lots of job openings. Those job openings will just be filled. We're also going to see companies out there make changes. They're going to be softening up in filling their jobs. Maybe some of you have looked at it and said, well, John and Susie and Peter have actually been picking up all the work of the person we were going to hire anyway, so we don't want to spend it anyway. So we're just going to make them continue to do it and won't pay them anymore. All right? Good CFO judgment. But But the reality is that there's still plenty of jobs out there, and there will be. From a standpoint of inflation, again, over the next several months, you'll start to see that number come down. Definitely that math factor will make it because of the way inflation is calculated. But the reality is prices are going to remain sticky. It's extremely hard to reduce the price points because we're paying people so much more money and our input costs are higher. That's just not going to happen in most places. Example, I had a gentleman come over the other day to adjust my garage door. It decided, the one door decided it didn't want to go down all the way. And so he had to come over, and he's been over before, and I said, you know, we probably got to replace these, they're getting old. And he says, yeah, at some point they need to be done. They're insulated though, they're fine, and everything else. And I said, well, I heard the prices have gone up quite a bit. He says, oh, they have. And he says, I've been doing this 30 years, and they go up. But he says, he told me, he says, you know, I've never seen them come back down. So if you're going to do it any time, because it's unlikely those price points are going to go back down. Very difficult for corporations to cut prices unless they have an overabundance of product and they're just trying to release it and get it out into the market. Interest rates. The Fed, again, I'm suggesting 75 basis points today. My hope is 50 basis points in November, not the 75 the market calls for, and 25 in December, not the 50 the market is priced in today. And so, but we will continue to see increases. The Fed attempting to control inflation with just interest rates instead of implementing monetary policy controls, which they needed to start with and do simultaneously. Not the fact that rates didn't need to go up, they were artificially low. But the reality is we need to do both, but we're going to see those and that'll go forward. Housing will continue to soften nationally. Again, certain pockets are not going to see as much pain. Utah being one because of the demand that's here. And so, you know, there's going to be softening without question, but you're not going to see a huge, huge drop. And then finally, when we look at growth and the consumer, we'll continue to see growth as we move forward. Our economy is going to continue to muddle through. It's not going to be spectacular. Globally, it's not going to be spectacular, but it'll muddle through. People are working. People have jobs, people spend money, they have demands, they have needs, and those will be fulfilled. And as you go about, and if you'll go do that walkabout and look at different things, whether it's going to the movies or going out to dinner or even going shopping or noticing the pile of boxes from Amazon on your neighbor's porch that maybe you want to pilfer. No, I didn't say that. That will continue. So we continue to buy things. Sometimes we do it in a different way, but we'll continue to do things and continue to spend, and so growth will continue. So with that, questions before we continue on? Sir? Absolutely, it is. I mean, you know, you can't pay somebody, you know, $18 at a fast food restaurant to stand at the counter without increasing the price points, and that goes across the board from everything else. I don't know if I'm not a big McDonald's person, personally. You know, if you saw my car out there, I have an acronym. I have an acronym on my license plate. OUFG. OUFG. Anybody have any idea what that stands for? Off the top of your head? It's old, ugly, fat guy. Okay? So I try, and it literally is on my car. I try to avoid McDonald's. But what's happened with these inflationary pressures, and especially with wage growth pressures, is they changed some things a couple of years ago. And I had to go into McDonald's to see it. Okay? They actually, you can walk in and they have kiosks where you can punch in your own stuff, do your own order, and then they just call it to you and give it to you. Why? Don't have to hire little Johnny to stand at the counter at $18 an hour. So we're seeing definitive changes because of wage growth, and I don't think you're going to see that go away, especially with the number of job openings that are out there. There's too much pressure to have that stick, and it's also very difficult to say to somebody, oh, by the way, especially in the lower type income jobs, oh, by the way, you're getting a pay cut. That's difficult. It's difficult across the board. So wage growth not continuing at the rate that it has, but it's definitely not going to go down, and definitively affected inflation. Been very hard for it not to pass on those costs to services. I mean, if you looked at hotel prices and things lately, very, very high. So lots of changes. Anything else? Sir. It's gonna have an impact on inflation. Why? I have now $500 a month I can spend. And so positive for the kids that took out massive amounts of debt, real negative for those of us that worked full time when we went to school, right? And so you look at that change, and will it have an effect? Yes, it'll cause some more inflationary pressure. More spending. Remember, it's monetary. It's the amount of money in the system that causes inflation. How much can I spend? So I know I'm at time, aren't I? Let me just finish up by saying we're going to continue to see our economy thrive. It's not going to thrive at a huge GDP rate, but we're going to continue to move forward. Utah, in and of itself, is extremely attractive to continued positive growth. Why? Unemployment's so low. Innovative companies, great companies that do wonderful things, opportunities to move forward, bringing in thought leaders from the outside, opportunities to see things move forward, to export to other states and other nations. Utah's going to be, way, way, way down there from a standpoint of looking at the list of states when you start to see problems occur. And so we look fairly healthy as a state. We look good as a nation. But again, it's going to be slow growth. It's not going to be rapid growth. But we're directionally correct is the best thing I could say. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I hope as you go to your breakout sessions that some of the information I provided will spur some thoughts in your discussions and help further the information that you're going to go over and ideas and thoughts that you can share with each other. So thank you very much. Good to be with you.